welcome to History Talks. I'm your host, Will. This is Sebastian. In this episode, we continue our series on the Crusades, and we will be discussing the Seventh Crusade. So, Sebastian, tell me, how did the Seventh Crusade begin?
Well, the Khwarezmid Sultanate took the city of Jerusalem after just 15 years of it being held by the Christians. The Pope really wanted to get the city back, but the thing is, some of the Crusader fervor, especially the fervor from the first four Crusades, had kind of died down by this point. I mean, Jerusalem had been in Muslims' hands for so long, and there have been so many failed attempts to take it back. Not just the Crusades we mentioned, but also, various other efforts, like by the Kingdom of Jerusalem, or some of the minor Crusades, By this point, some of the fervor and surrounding the Kingdom of Jerusalem had died down for a lot of kings.
Okay. And just to put context on this, what year are we talking about?
So this is the 1240s.
1240s, okay. And how long after the Sixth Crusade was this?
About 15 years.
15 years, okay. All right.
So, by this point, for the majority of Europe's nobility, the Kingdom of Jerusalem had pretty much just become a place where you put unwanted knights and sons who had no chance of inheriting. Like, most people didn't... Like, it was still a thing you could do, but, the fervor just wasn't there.
I understand.
Except for in the heart of one king, King Louis IX of France, who I'd like to add is a saint in both the Roman Catholic Church and the Anglican Communion. Because, say what you will about his tactical ability, but this dude had balls. Yeah. So, early on in his reign, Louis IX, he develops a sort of zealotry, I guess, on behalf of Christianity. Like, some of his first policies are just cracking down on blasphemy. And eventually, in 1244, he decides to answer the Pope's call and organize his own crusade. He gathers all the nobility of France, all the troops he can get. He even recruits an English commander named William to go with him on this crusade. So he gathers up everyone. The Pope is like, yay, we have a new Crusader Lord who does not have conflicts with me. And Louis IX, he sets sail for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. He takes his boats to Cyprus, and from there he is faced with three options, two of which are calls, and one of which was a plan he was thinking about earlier.
Okay.
The Latin Empire is collapsing. It still holds the city of the world's desire, Constantinople, but the Nicene Empire, which is Orthodox, seems about to take over the Latin Empire and restore the Byzantine Empire. On the one hand, if he intervened, he could keep Constantinople in Catholic hands, in Western Catholic hands. But on the other hand, that would also might detract his troops from the larger goal of retaking Jerusalem, and also probably deepen divides even further between the Catholics and the Orthodox. Also, the Templars have a call for help because the city of Sidon from the Principality of Antioch was just taken by the Muslims, and so this is bringing Antioch on the brink of collapse, and the Templars want his help. On the one hand, the army has just taken the city, and there's still a decent Muslim army protecting the city. It'd be hard to take, and it's only of that much strategic importance to Antioch and not to Jerusalem itself.
Okay.
But it is still a major city.
Okay, so all of this, is this something that he has not yet decided? He's deciding this as he's sailing across the Mediterranean. He leaves, he raises an army.
Yeah.
He answers the Pope's call
Yeah.
to crusade. and then he sets sail.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying he's trying to decide his strategy at this time. Is that actually where he's deciding the strategy as they're sailing?
Partially. He had a plan in mind to go to Egypt, but he also gets these calls for help as he gets to Cyprus.
Well, he wants to go to Egypt, which what was that? Was the Fifth Crusade?
Yeah.
Okay, so the Fifth Crusade, the Crusader lords tried taking Egypt. They tried going up through the Nile. They did not have success there. I'm sure he's well aware of that.
Yeah.
Right? But he has an idea that maybe he'll go back.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he'll be able to be the one to take Egypt.
Yeah.
But he's not even sure that's what he wants to do. He just knows he has an army, he has a fleet of ships, and he wants to crusade.
So eventually he comes to the decision that that the Templars, that he'll team up with the Templars to take Egypt, and then eventually with the power base of Egypt, they can later focus on things like Sidon.
Interesting. Okay. And why? What is strategic about Egypt that he wants to take? Is it because of the farmland there?
Precisely. It's the most fertile region within the Near East.
I see. Okay. All right.
So
that's why he wants to take over. He's thinking if he can take Egypt,
mm-hmm.
he can now have a place to grow food for his army. They can be stationed in the Eastern Mediterranean, have a food source, a food and a fresh water supply.
Food, fresh water, and not to mention that some of the largest trade cities in the Mediterranean, like, for example, Alexandria, are located in Egypt.
I see, okay.
So, but he recognizes the failures of the Fifth Crusade, namely their failure to deal with the Nile. So his plan is to, instead of landing in the delta and going down south,
mm-hmm.
he's going to set up a base of operations in Acre,
mm-hmm.
then go through the side of Egypt, straight to Cairo, and then he can take Cairo, and Cairo is pretty much the key to controlling the Nile. And he's gathered all the notes he could potentially get on the Nile. You know, European records didn't have that much on the Nile, but he took what he could get.
Okay.
So Louis, he leads his army and he leads a surprise attack on one of the Muslim camps nearby. One of the main cities in between him and Cairo is Al-Mustansir.
Okay.
He attacks the camp of the Muslim army that's nearby and successfully destroys that army and gets their supplies. And it seems to go pretty well.
I'm assuming this is a surprise. They didn't even know Louis was coming.
Yeah, as far as I know, they weren't too sure.
Okay, so he lands in Egypt.
I mean, they would have figured out eventually, but you know.
Right, but he had the element of surprise here. He lands in Egypt, has a success, and then what does he do?
He goes to take Al-Mustansir. However, the Egyptians have a brilliant tactician on their side, who is called Barbais al-Bari. And Barbais is a Mameluke, which, to put it shortly, Mamelukes are slave soldiers, typically recruited from the steppe. So usually Chechens, Kipchaks, etc.
Okay.
That in exchange for converting to Islam, they could potentially gain ranks
Which steppe is it? Just Chechens? Where is that exactly? Is that Central Asia?
It's the Western Caspian.
Western Caspian, okay.
So near Georgia and...
I understand.
Yeah. So, so the Mamelukes become an elite sort of guard of slave soldiers who are supposed to serve the Ayyubid Sultan. And Barbais becomes the commander of the Mamluks through his excellent skill and the respect of his fellow Mamelukes. And while Louis approaches Al-Mustansir, he's already figured out a plan to split up Louis's army into two segments. And by splitting his army up, he's able to press his cavalry onto one side, led by that William guy I mentioned earlier, and defeat it, and then turn his army back, surround Louis, and defeat Louis. So Louis gets defeated and captured.
Wow.
Some of his men are able to make it back to Jerusalem, but for the most part, him and his army are captured, and his ransom is a substantial amount. So he pays the ransom, but he doesn't go back to France. Louis doesn't go back to France. Instead,
Who pays the ransom?
Louis does.
Louis does. Okay, his family is able to pay it.
Yeah.
Okay, they pay his ransom. He's released.
Yes.
But does not go back to France. So where does he go?
He goes back to his base of operations in Acre and he's taken notes on the Nile and some of the Muslim fortifications.
Wow. So he's not deterred at all.
Yeah.
He came into Egypt, had a victory, had a massive loss, was captured, pays a massive ransom, and immediately says, I'm going to get back to work.
Yeah.
Fighting.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go home. I'm just going to fight again.
Yes.
Okay.
So he sees an opportunity with the Mongols, of all people. He sends out an
opportunity for an alliance?
Yes, actually.
Okay.
He sends out so he assumes de facto control of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and then he sends out an emissary to the Mongol...
How does he assume de facto control?
Basically, he's... technically, the King of Cyprus is the de jure King of Jerusalem. However, most operations at this time are run by Louis IX. He's generally the one doing most things. He has the army. He has the leadership.
Interesting. So is this something where the King of Cyprus simply just does what Louis tells him to do?
He just kind of has to.
He kind of has to because Louis has a more powerful army, is that why?
Yeah, and Louis is more respected.
I see, okay.
Yeah. So he sends out an emissary to the Mongols, and at first the Mongol Great Khan, Guyuk, is actually kind of receptive to the idea of an alliance where the Crusaders take Egypt and the Mongols take Syria and some other pieces of land in Arabia and Jordan.
Okay, and I'm assuming since they're going for different territories, the goal of this is to have a two-front war to weaken their enemies. Is that correct?
Precisely.
Okay.
However, Guyuk Khan dies. His successor doesn't really feel like doing it and just politely sends away the diplomat.
Okay.
So then Louis tries again. This time he sends a diplomat to Ogedei Khan and says, "Hey, you know that..."
Ogedei Khan, who is that? Is that another Mongol?
Yeah, he's, or sorry, not Ogedei, Ogedei's grandson. Ogedei being one of Genghis Khan's sons.
Okay.
So he sends another emissary to the Mongols to say, hey, here's why this alliance thing might be a good idea. But then, eventually, relations break down, partially due to the translator not being very good at his job, and also it's complicated because the Khan of the Golden Horde, Berke, doesn't understand what's going on and instead sends his own message to Louis, saying, hey, you should submit as a tributary of the Mongols, so nothing happens there. There's one last effort where the Mongols send a letter to Louis saying, hey, maybe if you help us out militarily, we might go on with this plan, but there's no evidence that Louis even got the letter.
Okay.
So that plan falls out.
Hmm.
So Louis starts thinking up a new strategy.
Okay, so he's undeterred. He is just going to keep going and going.
But then he can't for two reasons. One, his money runs out.
Uh-oh.
He has to go back to France and collect more income. And two, his position in France is being threatened, namely by King Henry III of England.
Okay.
So he.
How long has Louis been in Egypt at this point?
He was in Egypt for 6 years, and then he he spent 4 years in Acre.
Wow. Okay. So he's been gone for 10 years total. Henry III is watching this, thinking, "Wow, 10 years. I can make my move."
Yeah. So
okay.
Louis goes back to France, but the Crusade is never far from his mind, which eventually leads on to the Eighth Crusade, also organized by Louis.
Wow. Okay. And so that ends the Seventh Crusade. So the Seventh Crusade was really not very eventful. I mean, it lasted years, but it sounds like essentially what happened. Louis was very motivated, very fired up, ready to fight. Goes to the Eastern Mediterranean, has one minor victory, has a major loss, and then spends years trying to recruit allies to go and fight more. Is unsuccessful, has problems at home back in France, has fiscal difficulties, and has to return.
Yeah.
And that's it. So really not a whole lot happened in this. It was a lot of maybe waiting around, trying to plan something, and nothing really, no real movement.
Yeah.
Maybe a waste of resources for Louis. He probably burned through, it sounds like he ran out of money. He just burned through money.
Yeah. But
accomplished nothing.
But there are two important consequences of this crusade.
Okay.
One, his bravery and sheer dedication earn a lot of respect for Louis. A lot of people start to respect Louis' sheer dedication.
Oh, okay. They admire how he was captured and immediately went back to work, trying to come up with a strategy to fight even more. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's where this is back in Europe. You're saying what
yes.
among the nobility, among the warrior class there. They
among the nobility and even some of the French clergy.
Wow. Okay.
And two, remember that Barbais guy I mentioned earlier? This ends up being his chance to prove himself as a great leader for the Mamelukes, which eventually leads to the later Mameluke revolt, where this army of slave soldiers revolts against the Ayyubids and ends up taking over Egypt, forming the Mameluke Sultanate. So this crusade is actually somewhat important for the history of Egypt.
Okay. All right, man. So it sounds like that's the end of it then.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, not really. Other than just there's just so much about Louis IX that.
Okay, so he's an interesting character. It sounds like not a whole lot happened in the Seventh Crusade, but Louis IX was a very interesting character, and maybe that's something we'll do in another history talks episode.
Yeah, because he
focus on his life.
Yeah, because he did all sorts of reforms for France, he ended up leading the Eighth Crusade.
Okay, and that will be our next episode, right? Was the Eighth Crusade, and just as a preview, was the Eighth Crusade, did that turn out any better for him, or do you want to leave that as a surprise for the next episode?
I'll leave it as a surprise.
I think that's a good idea. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode when we talk about the Eighth Crusade.